Well, good morning, Forsey Christian School students. This is Mr. Stewart, and it's my privilege once again to share a little bit from the Bible with you. It's one of my favorite things to do in the world, is talk about the Bible. It's actually on a Friday morning now when I'm recording this. I don't know when you all will be watching this, but it's Friday morning, and it's been the end of a really exciting week in the middle school, at least, because we had our first round of not new students, but in-person students coming to Forsey to learn in person for the first time all year. So it's very exciting for us middle school teachers to see them in the building. There weren't that many of them, but you could tell they were excited and we were excited. And it was just kind of a reminder to me that good times are coming, better times are coming, and it's going to start getting warmer, and hopefully more students will be coming, and on both sides of the building. And it was a really great, fun time to see that this week. So I was really encouraged this week at the progress that we are making, and hopefully everybody will continue to stay safe and be smart and socially distance and wear your mask and all that, and we can get more and more of you back into the building and start feeling a little bit more like real school, because it's been a while, right? Hasn't it, for all of us? So very exciting to see. So this morning I wanted to talk to you a little bit from the book of James, and especially the book of Galatians in the New Testament, because that's where we've been studying and focusing this past week in 7th grade Bible. That's what I teach. And we had some interesting discussions this week about the connection between faith and deeds, as James calls them, or faith and good works, however you want to call them. And James says a couple of things in his letter. It's one of my favorite letters in the Bible, by the way, the book of James. He's very direct, very straightforward, but in a lot of ways very challenging with some of the things he says to his readers. And one of the things he says in chapter 2, which kind of caught some of my students' attention, and we had to talk about it for a little bit, is faith without works is dead. He comes right out and says that in chapter 2, actually a couple of times. Faith without works is dead. And some of my students posed a very good question. Well, wait a minute. I thought I'd been taught here by you, Mr. Stewart, and other teachers here, that God only, to get into heaven, we just have to put our faith in Jesus and recognize that we're a sinner. We can't do it on our own, and all God looks for is faith. So why is James saying it's faith and works? Does that mean James is kind of contradicting the rest of the Bible? That's a good question. So we talked about that for a little bit, and I tried to make the point, which I'll come back to maybe later, my little message here. And James isn't talking about salvation. He's talking about kind of evidence and proof of salvation. Yes, God just wants us to put our faith in Jesus. All right. But if it's a genuine, real faith, James is saying, it's going to show itself in the way we talk and think and act and treat others and all of that. It's not going to happen overnight, all right, but it will happen. It should happen, and it must happen. And so James is just kind of explaining the role. Faith comes first, and then good deeds. That's kind of a very shortened, very, very short summary of what I was trying to kind of say in Bible class this week. But then we took to the book of Galatians, where Paul spends the entire letter to the Galatian churches that he had visited just a few years earlier on his first missionary journey, and is trying to make the case to the Galatians that they have a whole new way of connecting to God now, and they were in danger of losing that. And Paul is actually very emotional in this letter to the Galatians. He's all over the map emotionally. He's angry in a lot of portions of the letter. He's angry at the Galatians for, as he says, abandoning the gospel that he had preached to them not that long ago when he wrote this letter. He's even angrier at the false teachers who are going around kind of behind him and in some places, ahead of him, and trying to teach these Galatians that, no, what Paul is saying is wrong. All right. It's okay to believe in Jesus, but you still have to follow the law. All right. So at times he's angry. At times he's pleading with the Galatians, please, listen to what I'm saying. I'm telling you the truth. I got this message from God, directly from God. All right. And at times he's sarcastic. He's very sarcastic at points in that letter. So it's a very emotional kind of roller coaster of emotions. But the point that Paul keeps driving home is the gospel is all about freedom. And the Galatians were throwing that away or abandoning that by going back to their old way of relating to God. See, throughout the Old Testament, the Jewish nation kind of had one way to get to heaven, to connect to God, and that was through following the law that Moses had given them, mostly in those first 5 books of the Old Testament. And those first 5 books have lots and lots and lots of laws in them, and rules and regulations, and the Jewish nation had to follow it. And part of that law was all sorts of sacrifices that the Jewish people would have to offer if they sinned. And of course, they all sin. We all sin. So there were all sorts of sacrifices. If you committed this sin, you had to have this kind of sacrifice, and this sin called that kind of sacrifice. So a lot of sacrifices of animals throughout the Jewish religion. And it was all kind of about following the law. And Paul's point to the Galatian believers, most of whom had come out of this lifestyle of following the law and of trying to obey the law, is, look, the law was always pointing toward this day when the Messiah would come and fulfill the law. And that person, of course, is Jesus. And Paul is saying, so Jesus fulfilled the law, which none of us ever could. He was perfect, and he was that perfect sacrifice for all of us, once and for all, the one-time sacrifice. And God declared that was good enough for me, for you, for anyone who puts their faith in Jesus. So yes, the gospel is good news. The word gospel actually means good news. And that's the good news for us, is that we no longer, even though we may not even know the Old Testament that well and don't know about all those however many hundreds of laws there were in the Old Testament, this notion that we have to be good enough for God is something we don't have to worry about anymore, because part of Paul's point to the Galatians was we're never going to be good enough for God, because God's standard is perfection. Imagine this. All right, you're all school students, right? So I'm assuming that you love tests because it's part of your school life, right? When a teacher says there's a test next Friday, you're like, yes, a test coming, right? Yes? No? No, not really crazy about tests. Okay, I thought that was just a middle school thing, but maybe even elementary school students, you guys and girls don't like tests either? Okay, well, unfortunately, that's kind of one of the main ways that we teachers have to gauge what's kind of in there, how much you've learned about what we've been trying to teach you. So we're not really crazy about tests either as teachers, but we kind of have to do them. All right, but imagine a test that lasts your whole life long, from birth to death, 60, 70, 80 years long test. All right, and every day there are dozens of questions on that test, and that test gets added to every day. And those questions are all choices you make in life, right or wrong, do the right thing, do the wrong thing. And you make those kind of decisions every day. You may not realize how many you make, but you constantly are making decisions to do the right thing or the wrong thing. Okay, so imagine a test with thousands of questions on it that goes on for years and years and years. Now also imagine that to pass that test, you have to be perfect. You have to get a 100. Any time you make the wrong choice on a right or wrong choice in your life, whatever it is, you fail. You fail that test. Now you got to be thinking, if you're honest with yourself, you've got to be saying, there's no way I can pass that test. And you're right. That's part of the point Paul makes in his letters. And this is where, again, the good news comes in for all of us, because we don't have to worry about passing that test for God to accept us. God has given us another way to get into heaven, okay, to be saved. And that is to put our faith in what Jesus did, because he passed that test 100%. So Paul makes a startling statement here that we talked about this past week in Galatians. It's in Galatians chapter 5, verse 1. He says, "For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery." That's a harsh word, okay? Slavery. But in Paul's mind, and it's what he spends his letter trying to show the Galatians, if you start off on this path where you think that the only way you can get to God is by obeying the law and fulfilling the law, you're going to fail. And it is a yoke. It's almost of slavery. You are kind of enslaved to that way of living. And Christ has set us free from that. We are free. Now, he goes on to say, I want to make this very clear, that doesn't mean we can just do anything we want with our lives. He goes on right after this to say, no, we should be living to serve others and to serve God. And that's part of the point that James is making in this faith and deeds thing that I kind of talked about earlier. Okay, so he says, if you're living that way under the law, now that you know that Christ has set you free and want to go back to that old way, you're basically making yourself a slave all over again. And he says, that's crazy. Now, we're in the middle of Black History Month here at Forsey Christian School. And I'm sure some of you have talked about this in your classes. Maybe you will in the days to come. But the Emancipation Proclamation, the end of the Civil War, is one of the highlights for Black Americans throughout their history in America. All right, we fought a long, painful Civil War. And at the end of that Civil War, the slaves were freed, finally. Now, Paul is saying, and just think about this, Paul's making an analogy here that it'd be like at the end of the Civil War when all these thousands and thousands of slaves were freed, and if the Union soldiers came through town or, posted that Emancipation Proclamation up wherever, and these slaves looked at that, heard what the soldiers had to say, read the Emancipation Proclamation and said, you know what? This all sounds really good, but I think I'll stay being a slave. That's crazy. That's crazy talk, right? Nobody would ever do that. That's unimaginable, right? So Paul is using some strong language here, but he's trying to get home the point that if you are living your life in this rat race of trying to do enough good things in your life to make God happy with you, that God will love you more or whatever, you are just, you're chaining yourself in a sense to this lifestyle that's never going, it's never going to work, and you're just going to make yourself crazy trying. He says Christ has set us free from the yoke of slavery to the law. Great, awesome news, freeing news. That's the good news. And I hope you all have kind of experienced that as school students. You've experienced that freedom that comes from living, knowing that God loves you and God has a great plan for your life. Okay? So I want you to think about that a little bit today, in the days to come as we're going through this month of February. All right, and understand that you can't do anything to make God love you more. All right? And God has already done the greatest thing he could ever do to bring you to him by sending his son to die for you on the cross. I hope you've kind of made that your own, invited Jesus into your heart and into your life, okay, and experienced, how freeing that is. Doesn't mean we're going to be perfect. We're still going to mess up. But God loves us so much, wants us to be with him. So if you have any more questions about this, I encourage you to talk to your teacher about it. I'm sure he or she would love to talk to you more about this. I know I certainly would. Wish I had more time to talk about this, but the day calls and got some classes to prepare for. But I've enjoyed this time with you, and I look forward to the day when I can see more and more of you in the building. And again, that day when we can kind of make this feel more like school the way we used to know it. I'm looking forward to that day, and I'll be praying for you all and hope to see you in the hallway soon. Take care of yourselves, and God bless.